Okay. Okay.
Excuse me, we're on
Okay,
Chav
so
Beis. Chav Beis Lamed Mishnah. Sukkah Hamiduvleles. The Gemara will tell us what that is. Hi, Johnny.
good morning. Good evening to you.
Sukkah Hamiduvleles v'shetzilsa meruba mechamsa. And if the sukkah's shade is more than the sun, ksheira. The Gemara will say, is this two different cases, or is this one case? It could be a machlokas. Then another case in the Mishnah, Hamu'uba kimin bayis. If you've made the schach very thick, even though you can't see the stars, ksheira is the Mishnah. My meduvleles. What does it mean meduvleles? Omer of sukkah aniyah. A sukkah that has very little schach, that there's a lot of space in between. It's just that there is, we learned before that if you have space, not schach, three tfachim along the length of the sukkah, then it's not kosher. But we're talking about it in no area is there less than 3 tfachim. So, l'chora, a sukkah meduvleles is considered kosher, is the way how Rav explains. Shmuel Amar kana oile v'kana yored. It's you didn't put both pieces of schach next to each other. One is above, one is below. But therefore, there's light comes in more than the shade. But the chiddush of the Mishnah is if you lowered one of the pieces of the schach, because think about it as an intervening, like you have schach here, then you have schach here, in two different heights, that if you fictionally bring them all down, that they will all be in the same area on the same level, there would be more shade. In such a case, it would be kosher. Rav Tani Chada. Rav is learning that the case of a sukkah aniyah, and that as long as the shade is more, is the same thing. We're talking about one sukkah. But Shmuel Tani Tarti. Shmuel's talking about two different sukkahs. That a sukkah that has very little schach is kosher, because we use this principle of royan. And the case of the shade being more than the sun is even in a sukkah that doesn't have a lot of schach, as long as there's more shade, it would be kosher. Rav Tanichada, meaning sukkah meduvleles, and then he learns my meduvleles. What does it mean? Miduldeles, which doesn't have a lot of schach, shetzilsa meruba mechamsa, as long as there's still more shade than sun, ksheira. Ushmuel Tani Tarti. Shmuel says there's two different cases in the Mishnah. My meduvleles mubuldeles, which is this case where the one schach is above and one schach is below. The Tartik Tani, that sukkah mubuldeles ksheira, the tzilsa meruba mechamsa ksheira, that even in such a case, if at the time where the schach is above and below, that's not on the same level, there's more shade than sun. If you view it as if they're on the same level, both cases are kosher. Where we have this two pieces of schach, one on top of another, and we say it's kosher, it's only when there's less than 3 tfachim separating the two schachs. But if there's 3 or more tfachim distance between the lower level and the upper level of the schach, is psula. And Amar Rava afilu yesh bein zelaz shlosha tfachim, even if it's within 3 tfachim. Nami lo amar, we don't say it's kosher ela she'en b'gago tefach. We have that the width of the schach is a tefach or less. Susie, I'm teaching Daf Yomi upstairs. If it is a tefach, Then we use this concept called chavut romi. We drop the upper schach down to the lower schach, and it closes the space. Where is the source material that you to use this technique of chavut romi to drop it down and fill in the space is only if the width of the schach is a tefach. This not. Koires habayis v'aliyah. You're dealing with the reshus hayachid on Shabbos, and you have a roof, and then you have like a second story. She'ein alei maziva ve'ein chuvanos, and you've laid lumber again, lumber this way, lumber down here, and you haven't cemented it. Tuma tachas achas mehen. If there's tuma underneath one of the boards in the house, then everything underneath it tachtei tami. Bein hatachtona l'elyona, the space in between the roof and the upper roof, beinein tami. If the piece of tuma is between those two floors, between them is tami. Al gabe elyona keneged al rakia tami. And if the piece of tuma is on top of the upper roof, so the tuma goes all the way up to Shammai. If the upper ones were exactly placed to fill in the spaces that were created by the lower lumber, so the lower lumber you have board, and there's space in between, and the upper boards fill in that space from above it. So if that's the way it's constructed, tuma tachtein, so if there's tuma below the boards, tachas kulon tome. And if it's above the top floor, kenegdan ad l'rakiyah tome. The tuma shoots up to the heavens. The Tani Allah, and they analyzed this case, this works if the space between the boards are a tefach, and the boards themselves are a tefach. If there isn't between them a tefach, then the tumah from below doesn't extend above the ceiling. We see from here, Alma ki isbei tefach, if the boards themselves are a tefach, amin chavut romi. We use this principle of dropping the uppers to the lowers to fill in the space. But let's be tefach lo amin chavut romi. Shmami no, it's a good riot. Yosef Rav Kana v'komer lai shmaitzer. Rav Kana was teaching this sugya. Is that true? That if the board itself is not a tefach wide, we don't say chavut romi? I'll show you not so. Vatanya. We know that if you have a mavui that's closed off, so it's a three-sided mavui. It's not a mavui mafulish. It's a mavui sheina mafulish. It's not traveled by cross people. But the opening opens up in Rosh Hashanah. So Chazal made a takana that in order for you to carry in that three-cornered alley, you can only do so if you put a lechi or a korah at the opening of this mavui to Rosh Hashanah. Now, let's say the beam doesn't go fully crosswise. It only goes close to the wall. Or you have two beams coming from each side. You have a beam coming here and a beam coming here. They don't quite touch. Now, as long as the beams pachos mishloisha are within 3 tvachim of themselves, so we use lavud. You don't have to bring another beam to correct the mavud. If it's more than 3 tvachim, shloisha tzarech lavi kor acheres, then what you've set up doesn't work. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel Oimer, he gives you up to arba, pachos me arba, ein tzarech lavi kor acheres. So he's more lenient. Arba tzarech lavi kor acheres. Another case, v'chein shtei kares hamatimois. You have 2 parallel boards overlying the opening of the mavui. And each one is thinner than a tefach. but they're parallel. Lo bezu kedei lekabel hariach, v'lo bezu. Each one are not wide enough to put a brick of a tefach on them. So we know that those boards themselves are less than a tefach. But you have two boards, and you can place the brick across the two boards in makabel sarich l'rachbo tefach, because the two boards are within a tefach of each other. Ein tzarich lavi kar acheres. Ve'im lav tzarich lavi kar acheres. So that's another construct. Rav Shimon Gadol Oimer, im makabel charich or kol shlosha tefachim. He allows a 3 tefachim space between these boards. Ein tzarich lavi kar acheres. Ve'im lav tzarich lavi kar acheres. Now, what about if these beams coming out, are you achas lamala v'achas lamata? One was above, one was below. That means you have these two parallel boards again, but they're not on the same level. So you can't put a brick physically across them, but you can use the principle of Royan. You can estimate if by bringing the bottom one so they're on the same level, and you could put the brick across, as long as the upper one is not higher than 20 amas. So it's very interesting. You can put one board at, let's say, 11 tefachim, and the other board at 19 amas. So they're very far away from each other. But if when you do the estimation, they're close enough that you could put a brick across them, it works. Implying now we're dealing now, we proved that the boards are less than a tefach wide. Yet we're using this principle of chavod rami, which is bringing either up or down fictionally these boards, afal gadeles be tefach, which is a kasha on what we said before, that to say chavod rami, it's got to be at least a tefach. Amr lei, Zahara. Amr lei, tritz ve'mahachi. The upper board has to be within 20. So you don't use chavod rami. The lower board has to be within 3 tefachim. We use lavud, which everybody holds. The boards could be 3 tefachim separate. Or inami, the lower crossbeam has to be above 10 tefachim. The upper beam has to be within 3 tefachim. So our havamina that these beams could be very far apart from each other falls away. They really can only be within 3 tefachim of each other in order for it to correct the mavli. But if it's more than 3 tefachim away, if the beams were 3 tefachim, you could use chavod rami. But if it's not, you would not be able to use chavod rami. Then the Mishnah said, "V'shetzilta meruba mechamsa ksheva." As even if you have a little bit of schach, if there was more shade than sun, the sukkah is kosher. Implying, if it was 50-50, haki adadi psula. V'hatnan b'dich pirkei, but the next parak will teach me, v'shechamsa meruba mitzilsa psula, if there's shade more than, if there's sun more than shade psula, implying haki adadi kshera. So you're medayik exactly the opposite. Loikasha, it depends where you're looking when we say 50-50. Kan milmala. That what we say if it's 50-50. That's if it's 50-50 when you look at the schach. But when we say 50-50 on the ground, and you measure shade versus sun, and on the ground it's 50-50, it always means that above, the schach would be more than 50-50. And that would be kosher. They understood the principle that if you have a coin up here, the shadow of the coin on the ground will be much bigger. Then the Mishnah said, if the schach was thick, like a house, we said it's also kosher. Even though you can't see the stars, what if you cannot see? the stars of
the rays of the sun, it says here.
Yeah. If you can't see the rays of the sun, Beis Shammai poison, Beis Hillel machshirim. The halacha is in Tav Reish Lamed Aleph that if your schach is so thick that if it rained, there would be the rain wouldn't come in. There are those that will passel it. That's according to Rabbeinu Tam. That's what the Levush brings. The Gemara
Yeah,
says
I thought there was also the thing about rays of the sun. If the rays of the sun don't go through, then it's also not good.
so that's according to Beis Shammai. According to Beis Hillel, it's okay. Lechatchila yesh lashot et haschach ba'ofen sheyicholim liros mitochos koch ve'alayla gdolim. Lechatchila, you should have schach that you should be able to see the stars at night. Lechatchila. Aval imasa et haschach me'ube. You made a thick schach. Av she'en kochavim nir mitochom. Even you don't see the stars, ksheira. But if it's so thick that rain doesn't come in, then it's possible. That's the gather that the Shulchan Aruch brings us, Johnny. Doesn't say about the sun. The sun is the din about the shade in the sun. If as long as on the ground, it's 50-50 shade and sun, then there's enough schach above, which would make the sukkah kosher.
Mm-hmm.
If it's 50-50 schach above, then it would be possible.
Right.
Because if you had 50-50 above, there would be more sun than shade.
Yeah, sure. Right.
But if you measure the shade in the sun and it's exactly the same, then it would be kosher. Because Rashi, the Rambam, the Ran, the Ramban all hold that it would be kosher in that situation.
Right.
Mishnah. You build the sukkah on a wagon. This has to do like during the 6-Day War, you saw pictures of a sukkah on a tank, right? Ober Rosh Hasfino, you do it on a boat. Ksheira. Rashi says it's a dira saroy, and that's okay. The oil and labi yontif. In those cases, you could actually go into such a sukkah on yontif. However,
what happens to the muktzah underneath it? Like you have a truck. So are you going at some?
You're talking about that something that's not like a wagon, which like it's fixed to a horse. So a wagon wouldn't necessarily be muktzah, although I would think it's maybe muktzah machmas malacha.
Right.
Let's say it's a wagon that hadn't been used for malacha.
Okay, then that's a different story.
Correct. So, however, here's where the muktzah comes in. The Rosh Ha'ilan al Gabi Gamal, Ksheira. If you built a tree house, schach, sukkah, or you built a schach on an animal, me'ikar din is kosher, but the ein oil b'yontif. There you wouldn't be able to go on into yontif. The gazer rabbanon, the ein oil be'ilon. You can't climb a tree because maybe you'll pull something off. And an animal's also a balchai in that would be muktzah. On yontif, it's good. Yontif has a din muktzah as well. Let's say you use 2 trees as a wall of the sukkah, and one was man-made. Or 2 man-made walls and 1 tree, ksheira. But ve'inolan la b'yontif. Again, you're being mishtamesh with the sukkah because the schach needs that tree, and therefore you wouldn't be able to go into such a sukkah. Right? Somach karkois sukkah ruba be'ilan. You hung most of the schach on a tree.
So excuse me, Ernie. So when it says,
and then
Keilo, it says beilon kshero vein olin biyomto. So what's the purpose of being kosher? For what?
It's technically, you built a kosher sukkah, you mean with 4 walls or 2 and a mashu in the sukkah of a sukkah. Then remember, in that case, you're not using the tree at all. You just built it like a tree house. Make radin, the sukkah is kosher, but you wouldn't be able to use it on Yontif itself. Kol HaMoed, you could use it.
Oh,
It's like
Uh-huh.
Shabbos and Yontif, the tree is muktzah. You can't touch it on Yontif. Doesn't mean the
Right,
whole days
okay.
of Sukkot. The Yontif where it's Malacha is Aser of muktzah.
Let's say if there's no there's no
Muktzah is D'Rabbanan.
I know, so that's
Muktzah
why
is D'Rabbanan.
I know, and the tree and the sukkah is derisa. So if you have no choice,
What do you mean by on Rosh Hashanah, their goys are not to blow on Shabbos. That's a gzeira. It's a doraisa. So Chazal, b'sheva al taisa, have the ability to make a gzeira. So they made a gzeira. You're not allowed to climb a tree on Shabbos, and therefore the gzeira stands. Same thing like the gzeira of Shama Yavirenu, Dalad Amos, B'shus Rabbi, by Megillah or by Shofar. Same thing. Now, Shalosh b'dei Adav v'achas be'ilan. If 3 of the walls were holding the schach and only the tree one, ksheira v'oil b'yontif, because there you're not relying on the tree to hold up the schach. Zeh haklal, kol she'inat la'ilan b'chol lamad b'tnei. So if you remove the tree and the schach can remain up without it, ksheira, and oil b'yontif, and then the gzer of not using it on yontif would follow it.
Eddie,
Okay,
Shkoyach, what time is Shabbos?
Shabbos. They normally start at 6.